Let me ask you something. What if the silence you're afraid of is actually the moment your power returned? What if every unanswered message, every quiet night, every pause was not rejection, but recalibration? Silence doesn't mean you lost. Silence means the game changed. And today I'm going to show you how to win it. Silence scares people because it feels like nothing is happening. But silence is never empty. Silence is loaded. When you stop talking, stop chasing, stop explaining, you force the other person to finally hear themselves. Silence is misunderstood because we've been trained to believe that if something isn't loud, it isn't powerful. We think influence comes from talking, explaining, proving, convincing. But real power has never worked that way. Silence is not the lack of presence. It is the concentration of presence. When you stop speaking, you don't disappear, you intensify. You remove the distractions, the noise, the emotional clutter, and what remains is space. And space forces awareness. In that space, the other person can no longer hide behind your words or your reactions. They are left alone with their thoughts, their memories, and the weight of your absence. It's not weakness. That's pressure. When someone expects you to keep reaching out and you don't, their mind begins to do something uncomfortable. It starts asking questions. Why aren't they calling? Why aren't they reacting? Why are they calm? Silence disrupts expectations, and disruption creates attention. People rarely value what is always available. Constant access numbs appreciation. But when access is removed, suddenly the mind starts replaying moments, conversations, emotions. Silence turns memory into a spotlight. It doesn't erase you. It magnifies you. Your laugh, your presence, your energy become louder in their head precisely because you're no longer supplying them in real time. Silence also shifts the power dynamic. When words stop, control changes hands. The person who speaks more is usually the person who needs more. The person who can remain silent demonstrates emotional independence. That independence sends a message without saying a word. I am not dependent on your validation to function. And that message lands hard. It creates uncertainty. It creates imbalance. Humans are wired to seek balance, and when they feel it's slipping, they instinctively try to restore it. Silence forces the other person to lean forward emotionally, to wonder, to feel the distance. You didn't demand space. You became space. There's another layer to silence that most people overlook. It protects your dignity. When emotions are high, words are often driven by fear, not truth. Silence prevents you from saying things you can't take back, from exposing wounds that should be healed privately, from bargaining your worth away in moments of vulnerability. Every unsent message preserves your self-respect. Every pause reinforces your boundaries. And boundaries are not walls, they are signals. They say, I value myself enough not to perform pain for attention. That kind of restraint is rare, and rarity creates value. Silence also forces emotional accountability. When you are no longer explaining how you feel, the other person has no emotional guidebook. They must interpret their own feelings without your help. They must sit with discomfort instead of escaping it through conversation. And discomfort is where realization happens. Silence removes emotional cushioning. It exposes regret, curiosity, and unresolved attachment. When there's no reaction to push against, emotions turn inward. The questions grow louder, the what-ifs multiply, and slowly silence does what arguments never could. It makes them feel the loss instead of debating it. Most importantly, silence reconnects you with yourself. When you stop pouring energy outward, it returns inward. You begin to notice your strength again. Your routines stabilize. Your identity separates from the relationship. And that inner shift changes the quality of your silence. It's no longer empty or anxious. It becomes grounded. Calm silence has weight. It communicates confidence, self-trust, and emotional maturity. Even if the other person never reaches out, silence has already done its job. It has repositioned you from someone waiting to someone standing. And that internal shift is the foundation of real impact, because silence only works when it is rooted in self-control, not fear. Desperation is loud, restless, and impatient. It rushes ahead of itself, afraid of being left behind. Presence, on the other hand, is calm, grounded, and still. It doesn't chase outcomes, it anchors them. When emotions take over after separation or silence, the instinct is to reach out, to fix, to explain, to hold on tighter. But desperation doesn't create closeness. It creates pressure. And pressure makes people pull away. The more someone feels cornered by need, the more they seek distance to breathe. Presence works differently. It doesn't demand attention, it attracts it. Desperation communicates fear without saying a word. Every extra message, every emotional outpouring, every attempt to remind someone of what you meant to them sends the same signal: I am afraid of losing you. That fear transfers. People don't feel comforted by it, they feel responsible for it. And no one wants to feel responsible for someone else's emotional stability. Presence removes that burden. When you are present, emotionally regulated, composed, self-contained, you allow the other person to interact with you freely, without guilt or obligation. Freedom is attractive. Obligation is not. Presence also restores respect. Desperation unintentionally lowers your position because it places the other person above you emotionally. It says, you decide my peace. Presence says the opposite, my peace is mine. When you don't react impulsively, when you don't chase reassurance, you create a sense of emotional equality. Or even leadership. You show that you can handle uncertainty without collapsing. That kind of strength doesn't intimidate, it reassures. It tells the other person that being with you doesn't require rescuing you. And respect always precedes desire. There's a psychological shift that happens when desperation disappears. The emotional spotlight moves. Instead of you trying to convince them of your worth, they begin wondering about yours. Instead of you explaining your feelings, they start questioning theirs. Presence creates mystery, and mystery invites curiosity. When you don't reveal everything you're thinking, when you don't narrate your pain, the mind fills in the gaps. And the human mind is far more engaged by what it has to figure out than what it is handed fully formed. Desperation keeps you stuck in reaction mode. Presence puts you back in control. Reaction is driven by fear of loss. Presence is driven by self-awareness. When you respond instead of react, your energy changes. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You act less, but your actions feel intentional. This steadiness creates emotional gravity. People are drawn to what feels stable, especially after chaos. Presence becomes a safe emotional center, something others can orbit around rather than escape from. Most importantly, presence changes you before it changes anything else. When you stop operating from desperation, you stop abandoning yourself. You begin to notice your own needs, your own rhythm, your own identity outside of the connection. That self-connection radiates outward. Even in silence, presence is felt. It shows up in how you carry yourself, how you speak to others, how you move through the world. And that shift is unmistakable. Desperation asks, will you stay? Presence states, I am here. And that difference is everything. Value does not run after approval. It doesn't beg to be chosen. And it never negotiates its worth. The moment you start chasing, you unconsciously place yourself in a lower position, telling the other person that they are the prize and you are the applicant. That imbalance is subtle, but it's powerful. It changes how you're seen, how you're treated, and how much you're respected. Value works in reverse. Value stands still. Value creates gravity, and gravity doesn't pursue, it pulls. Chasing sends the wrong signal, even when the intention is pure. It communicates urgency, insecurity, and fear of loss, not because you care, but because you care more than you should at the expense of yourself. People respond to energy before they respond to words. When your energy says, "I need this to survive," the other person feels pressure, not connection. Value energy says, "I would like this, but I will be fine without it." That emotional independence is magnetic. It creates choice instead of obligation, desire instead of duty. Value is built, not declared. You don't become valuable by listing your qualities or reminding someone of everything you did for them. That's a resume, not attraction. Value is revealed through behavior, restraint, consistency, and self-respect. When you don't over-explain, when you don't defend your boundaries, when you don't stay where you're not appreciated, you demonstrate value. And demonstrations are always more convincing than arguments. The strongest message you can send is the one that requires no explanation. When value is present, the dynamic shifts naturally. The other person begins to notice what they no longer have access to: your time, your attention, your emotional availability, and scarcity changes perception. What was once taken for granted now feels rare, not because you're playing games, because you're no longer giving yourself away freely. Value doesn't disappear, it becomes selective. And selectivity increases worth. The mind assigns importance to what must be earned. There is also a confidence that comes with value that cannot be faked. It shows up in how you walk away without drama, how you don't linger in places where you are tolerated instead of celebrated. That quiet confidence forces reflection. It makes the other person question their assumptions. Maybe I misjudged them. Maybe I underestimated what they bring. Value invites reevaluation. It doesn't demand recognition. It provokes it. Ultimately, chasing keeps you focused on them, while value brings the focus back to you. When you invest in your growth, your standards, your emotional discipline, you stop needing someone else to validate your worth. And that's when the paradox happens. The moment you no longer chase value is the moment value begins to be chased, not because you tried to make it happen, but because you became someone whose absence is felt and whose presence must be earned. Emotional control is not about suppressing feelings or pretending you don't care. It is about mastery, knowing what you feel and choosing not to let those feelings control your actions. When situations are charged with uncertainty, silence, or loss, emotions want to take the wheel. They want you to react immediately, to express everything at once, to unload the weight of your heart onto someone else. But reactions are temporary, impressions are permanent. Emotional control allows you to protect the long game instead of sacrificing it for short-term relief. When you lose control emotionally, you give away leverage. You reveal how deeply something affects you, how easily you can be shaken, how much power another person has over your internal state. That vulnerability may feel honest, but when it's uncontained, it can overwhelm rather than connect. Emotional control doesn't make you cold, it makes you intentional. It says, I feel deeply, but I choose when and how to express it. That choice is strength. And strength, even when quiet, is always noticed. Controlled emotion creates contrast. When someone expects chaos and receives calm, it disrupts their narrative. They anticipate anger, pleading, or dramatic exits. Instead, they encounter composure. That contrast lingers. Calm in the face of emotional tension creates curiosity and even discomfort because it forces the other person to question their assumptions. Why aren't they reacting? Why are they steady? Emotional control shifts the emotional labor onto the other person. They begin to process what you refused to spill outward. There is also dignity in restraint. Every moment you choose not to react impulsively is a moment you preserve your self-respect. Emotional outbursts often come with regret, not because the feelings were wrong, but because the timing and delivery were uncontrolled. Emotional control ensures that if and when you speak, your words carry weight. They are not drowned in noise. They land clearly, firmly, and with purpose. Silence paired with control can be more impactful than hours of emotional explanation. Emotionally controlled people become unpredictable in the best way. They don't respond on impulse, and that unpredictability creates presence. The other person cannot easily manipulate or anticipate their reactions. This shifts the dynamic from emotional push and pull to emotional awareness. Control establishes boundaries without needing to announce them. It communicates, I am not available for chaos, and boundaries that are enforced quietly are often the strongest. Most importantly, emotional control restores your internal balance. When you stop leaking energy through uncontrolled reactions, you begin to feel grounded again. Your thoughts clear. Your decisions improve. You start responding from self-respect instead of fear. This internal stability radiates outward. Even without contact, emotional control is felt. It changes how you move, how you speak, how you carry yourself, and that change sends a message louder than any emotional outburst ever could. Growth is the one response that cannot be ignored, copied, or dismissed. When you stop trying to be seen and start becoming better, something shifts. Growth is not loud. It doesn't announce itself or seek validation. It shows up quietly in how you think, how you act, and how you live. And that quiet transformation creates curiosity because it breaks expectation. People expect stagnation after separation. They expect emotional collapse, bitterness, or visible struggle. Growth surprises them, and surprise pulls attention. When you focus on growth, the narrative changes. Instead of being the person who was left behind, you become the person who moved forward. That forward motion creates contrast between who you were and who you are becoming. Contrast invites comparison, and comparison triggers reflection. The other person begins to wonder, what changed? That question is powerful because it comes from their mind, not your explanation. Curiosity is always stronger when it is self-generated. Growth also alters your energy. When you invest in your body, your discipline, your confidence, and your purpose, you carry yourself differently. Your posture shifts. Your voice steadies. Your presence becomes more grounded. This change is felt even from a distance. Growth has a frequency. It doesn't chase attention, but it draws it naturally. People are instinctively curious about transformation because it signals momentum, and momentum is attractive. There is also a sense of loss that growth triggers in others. When someone sees you improving without them, it disrupts their sense of importance. They may have assumed you would pause, wait, or struggle. Growth challenges that assumption. It suggests that your life did not stop. That realization can create curiosity mixed with regret. Did I misjudge their impact? Did I underestimate their strength? Growth reframes the past without you ever mentioning it. Growth removes emotional predictability. When you no longer respond the way you used to, when your reactions are calmer, your boundaries firmer, your focus sharper, you become unfamiliar. Familiarity breeds comfort, but unfamiliarity sparks interest. Growth turns you into a version of yourself that must be rediscovered. And people are drawn to what feels new, even when it once felt known. Most importantly, growth is not performed for return. It is done for self-respect. And that authenticity is what makes it powerful. When your improvement is real, not strategic, it cannot be dismissed as manipulation. It becomes undeniable. Curiosity grows not because you wanted it to, but because growth creates a silent question in the other person's mind. Who are they now? Wholeness changes everything because it removes the need that once distorted your actions. When you are not whole, you seek completion through another person. Your choices are driven by fear of abandonment, loss, or emptiness. But when you become whole, you stop reaching outward to be filled. You stand complete. That internal shift is subtle, but it's profound. It changes how you relate, how you respond, and how you carry yourself. Wholeness doesn't beg for connection. It allows connection to meet it naturally. When you are whole, you no longer send mixed emotional signals. There is no inner conflict pulling you toward them while another part of you resents them. Your energy becomes aligned. Alignment creates calm, and calm creates safety. People are drawn back not to chaos, but to stability. Wholeness makes you emotionally safe to approach again because you are no longer trying to extract something from them. You are offering presence, not pressure. Wholeness also dissolves attachment to outcome. You don't need them to return to validate your worth or confirm your value. And that lack of attachment paradoxically increases attraction. When someone senses that you are okay with or without them, they feel freedom instead of responsibility. Freedom invites return because it removes the fear of being trapped in expectations or emotional debt. Wholeness says, you are welcome, not required. There is clarity that comes with being whole. You see the past more honestly, without idealization or bitterness. That clarity shows in how you speak, what you tolerate, and what you no longer chase. You don't reopen old wounds to prove points. You don't rehash stories to seek closure. You've already closed them within yourself. That inner closure is felt externally. It changes the emotional temperature of any interaction, making return feel lighter, not heavy. Wholeness also raises standards quietly. You don't announce them, but you live them. You no longer accept half-effort, uncertainty, or inconsistency. This shift forces the other person to rise or remain distant. And if they consider returning, they do so with a different mindset. They sense that access to you now requires presence, respect, and intention. Wholeness doesn't guarantee return, but it ensures that any return is conscious, not careless. Most importantly, when you are whole, return stops being the goal. Your life is full, your identity intact, your peace protected. Whether someone comes back or not no longer defines your direction. And it is in that exact state, when you are no longer waiting, hoping, or leaning, that return becomes possible. Not because you asked for it, but because you became someone who no longer needed it. So if you're waiting for a message, waiting for a sign, waiting for them to turn around, stop. Not because they won't come back, but because your life is too valuable to be placed on pause. Silence was never your punishment. It was your training ground. Every moment you chose restraint over reaction, growth over grief, wholeness over longing. You were rising, quietly, relentlessly, and whether they return or not, one truth stands unshaken. You are no longer the person who was left. You are the person who learned to stand. And that kind of strength doesn't need chasing, convincing, or waiting. It simply walks forward and lets whatever is meant to return find its way back.